Midweek Murders contains graphic and explicit content. Listener discretion is advised.
Last time we recorded, I wanted to tell you about the insect family that we in Sweden call the berry farts.
Mm-hmm.
It's a type of bug, it might be a beetle, that we call berry farts. I would say they're probably crawling on berries a lot of the times, like you can find them in berry bushes and stuff like that. If you take them up from the bush, they will pee on you or excrement some kind of weird fluid that smells like farts. Do you have that in England?
No,
What?
I don't think you have that in Sweden. I think this is a fever dream.
Okay, should we start?
Go for it.
You're listening to Midweek Murders, which means no fucking shit. You want to do it?
Every time.
Do you want to do it in a Scottish accent? Can you do it in a Scottish accent?
It's Wednesday, my dudes, which means that it's time to talk about crime. You're listening to Midweek Murders. I'm your host, Willie McBurney, and with me is my co-host,
Sandra. Who's Willie McDermott?
Willie McBurney.
Bernie.
It's the Scottishest name I could think of.
Okay, that's Joe. You did great, man.
This week, we're going to talk about Christopher Halliwell and the two ladies that he murdered.
I would say a 5.
5? Fuck off.
On that last bit. Maybe a 6.
What, the two ladies that he murdered?
It's the murdered that does.
Listen to a Scottish person say murdered.
Alright. Okay. Yeah, so this week we're going to talk about the murder of Sian O'Callaghan and Becky Godden-Edwards. So I got my information from Wikipedia, BBC News, The Independent by Paul Peachy. I also got references or information from a confession, a TV drama. Yes, I watched a whole series a couple of weeks before this episode, but I did. And, this is going to be controversial. An article in The Sun by Nicola Stowe, and also gov.uk Pace Laws Code C Detention.
Willie McBurney got his references from a website called judiciary.uk, which was a very informative website that had the recordings of the actual court trials.
Ooh, exciting.
And the BBC article.
So, Sian O'Callaghan was at a nightclub in the early hours of the 19th of March 2011. Her boyfriend Kevin texted her at 3:30 at night. He didn't get a response. When Sian still hadn't arrived home in the morning, he called the police and reported her missing, as this was unusual behavior for Sian. The text message Kevin had sent had been received at the Severneck Forest area, 12 miles or 19 kilometers away. But CCTV footage had captured Sian on her way back to their flat in the opposite direction of Severneck Forest at 2:52, and the flat was only 800 meters away. As the forest area was far away from when she can be seen walking towards her home, and the message received 40 minutes after disclosed her location as in the forest, the police determined that she must have been traveling in a vehicle. So the day after her disappearance, the police issued a public appeal for any information regarding Sian and announced that they had begun searching the forest area. Approximately 400 civilians joined in on the search. Detective Steve Fulcher told the public on the 23rd that they should stop searching the forest, as the police had zeroed in on a few hotspots and said that specialist search teams would continue the search on their own. But what was actually happening was that the police had reason to believe that they had found the perpetrator and was hoping that he would lead them to where Sian was being held or to her body. In the CCTV footage, a car can be seen stopping close to where Sian was walking on the sidewalk. The car was a green Toyota Avensis with taxi markings, which could be tracked by CCTV driving towards Severneck Forest. They narrowed down the suspect list by talking to the taxi companies and arrested Christopher Halliwell, a 47-year-old taxi driver at an Asda supermarket parking lot on the 24th of March. They had been surveilling Halliwell for a while in hopes that he would lead them to Sian, to no avail. As they were concerned that he would take his own life after seeing him buy large quantities of paracetamol, they rushed to apprehend him so that he could be brought to justice. When Halliwell wouldn't talk to the arresting police officers, and Steve Fulcher got the news of that, he decided to tell the officers to bring Halliwell to the Iron Age Hill fort to question him himself. Halliwell confessed to the murder of Sian O'Callaghan there and led the police to her body near Uffington in Oxfordshire. Did I get it the second time?
Closer.
What is it?
Oxfordshire.
Yeah, I thought that's what I said. Oxfordshire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So after they had been led to Sian's body, Halliwell asked Fulcher, "Do you want another one?" which led to him confessing to the murder of Becky Godden-Edwards, who had been reported missing since 2007. After that, Halliwell led them to the grave. Any notes?
I have notes on the condition of Sian's body
Oh, yeah.
and some more detail about the process.
I'm ready for it.
The judge in one of his trials, I presume it was the first one, summarized the order of events and said that he'd turned off his taxi handset so that he wouldn't receive any calls, and either offered or persuaded Sian a ride home, took her into the forest where she was assaulted and murdered, and they know that a knife was used. She had stab wounds to her head, and she had bruising and abrasions to her face, which were consistent with being kicked. She also had bruising and abrasions to her left breast and nipple, which were consistent with biting or bite marks. So there was clearly sexual motivation involved. It wasn't just a murder lust. And the reason that they found him wasn't due to any forensic linking the first time around. So he was actually really careful in how he deposited any kind of evidence. So Sian was found buried naked. He'd removed all of her clothing. The surveillance team saw him twice take a bunch of cleaning products to the back seat of his car. So he was cleaning out the back of his car. He was also seen depositing a couple of bags into his wheelie bin. And when they went and recovered those, it was his seat covers and the headrest cover. So he knew that having her in the back of his car would leave a trace, whether it be hair or clothing or anything like that. So he got rid of it all.
I remember him depositing evidence and the surveillance people picking up on that.
Yeah, he also got in his car and drove away through another village, and the surveillance team were obviously following him. And when they passed the same road that they'd seen him drive down, they saw a small bonfire on the side of the road. So he'd obviously taken whatever else he couldn't throw away, probably Sian's clothes, and burnt them.
In the TV series I watched, I think it was her handbag, but it might not have been.
I don't know. They obviously couldn't recover what it was because it was burnt.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, he was seen on the CCTV, which was how they identified his car.
Yeah.
So they got an image analyst who identified the same car, the same model, and the same colour, and also noticed that it had lighter areas on the doors, which were the removable magnetic stickers of the taxi company that he worked for. So when they cross-referenced that with all of the taxi companies, there was pretty much only one person it could have been who ticked all of those boxes.
I remember in the TV series, they did say that he had clocked off before doing this.
So that's when he turned off his handset.
Yeah, so his last official drive was before this happened.
Mm-hmm.
But then when they questioned him about it, he said that he had gotten home before this even happened, which obviously wasn't true.
It was a big fat dirty lie.
Yeah. So on the 19th of October 2012, Halliwell pleaded guilty to the murder of Sian. But the confessions were ruled inadmissible because Steve Fulcher was said to have breached the guidelines of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act from 1984 by failing to caution Halliwell and denying him access to a solicitor. Fulcher hoped that this would be allowed, as the police are entitled to carry out an urgent interview without the solicitor present if there's a chance to save somebody's life. Even though Fulcher suspected Sian might have been dead, he argued that the best practice in every case is to treat it as if there's a chance to save somebody's life, as they had no evidence to the contrary. If she had been held hostage at some place, he felt like the pace would allow him to question him because there was a chance to save her life.
One of the court reportings that I read actually went into a lot of detail and had Fulcher's reasoning behind what he did. So to just go into that in a little bit more detail, when he was arrested in the car park, he was read his rights and cautioned, and everything was prim and proper. At that stage, as the supervising officer, Fulcher told his colleagues at the car park, conduct the emergency interview. An emergency interview is basically one where the suspect doesn't need to be taken back to a police station and have their solicitor or lawyer present, which is the only difference between that and a normal interview. If you get arrested by the police, you don't have to answer any of their questions until they take you to the police station and you've had a chance to have legal representation, unless it falls into this emergency category. So basically, they stuck him in the back of a car, an unmarked police car, and conducted the emergency interview. And they were instructed to only ask questions about Sian's whereabouts or her condition. So they were just asking, can you tell us where Sian is? Can you tell us if Sian is still alive? During that interview, he gave no answers. He either said no comment or that he didn't know where she was, he didn't know if she was alive, etc., etc.
Yeah.
They relayed all of that information back to the supervising officer. Yeah. At that point, legally, the emergency interview was ended. They couldn't continue with it. He should have been taken to the police station, read his rights again, and been given legal representation. The reason that it becomes inadmissible in court is because Fulcher had his officers take him, like you said, to another location where Fulcher then interviewed him again without giving him a caution or reading him his rights, and again refusing to let him have legal representation.
Yeah, no, I get that, and I understood that from what I read as well. From what I understood, he never stopped investigating the case as if Sean was still alive.
Yeah, and he gave testimony, Fulcher, to say that the reason he conducted the second emergency interview was to stay within the flow. He wanted Christopher to feel a bit of pressure, that they knew they were on to him. He wanted him to give him the answers as soon as possible. And his view, like you said, was that if Sean was still alive, that was more important to him than ticking all of the legal boxes of the interrogation process. He wanted to make sure if there was a chance that he could save Sean, that he did it.
Yeah.
As soon as that second interview took place, as soon as they didn't take him to the police station after that first emergency interview, Fulcher was in breach of protocol, and that's why it became inadmissible.
Yeah. So what I would like to amend here for the case is the Pace Laws Code C detention. And it's 11.1. What do you call that? 11.1?
That.
Okay. So it's 11.1.
Don't understand the question.
From gov.uk. Following a decision to arrest a suspect, they must not be interviewed about the relevant offence except at the police station or another authorised place of detention unless the consequent delay would be likely to A. lead to interference with or harm to evidence connected with an offence, or interference with or physical harm to other people, or serious loss of or damage to property.
It doesn't excuse the second interview, though.
No. So, in March of 2016, Halliwell was charged with the murder of Becky Godden-Edwards. Becky was a sex worker working in Swindon. So a friend of Becky's, another sex worker that had contact with her at the time of her death, testified at court that Halliwell had been obsessed with Becky. In the TV series, she's up on the stand talking about how he made her promise that she wouldn't tell Becky that they had sex, and he was representing himself at the time.
Yeah, in the second trial, he didn't have lawyers present. He even cross-examined witnesses and legally challenged the prosecutor, which I thought was quite funny.
Becky's friend was like, yeah, we had sex, and he said that don't tell Becky about this because he was obsessed with Becky, which in the news articles it said besotted. I don't think that's an accurate description.
And in the court hearing, it was described as a repeat customer.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines.
Yeah. Well, that's probably more accurate. He was a repeat customer who thought that he could control Becky. So he was obsessed. He was not in love with Becky. And the other sex worker said that he had sex with her and then, as I said, told her to not tell Becky about them having sex. And he was like, well, to be honest, you're not my type. And I was like, what the fuck is wrong with you, dude? Obviously, he's a murderer and a huge dick, but also, like, nobody believes that. Nobody believes that he's like, oh, you're not my type. I would never solicit your services. He's obviously fucked. So, the other evidence was that the police had also found a shovel at Halliwell's property, which had the same kind of soil on it as the field had where Becky's body had been buried. Becky's mother, Karen, said in a victim impact statement, "I never had a body to kiss goodbye before she was buried. But of course she had already been buried in a lonely field in the middle of nowhere for years, just left to rot." And I would like to say, for anyone who's into like true crime dramas, I saw the series, and what's the actor who plays Umbridge?
Imelda Staunton.
Yeah. When they rang on her door to deliver the news that Becky was dead, I cried. And I don't do that to TV series.
I mean, Imelda Staunton is a fantastic actor. You only have to look at her portrayal of Umbridge as a more hated character than Voldemort to show how well she portrayed an evil witch.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, she's so good that even I cried in this.
You cry
TV
all the
show.
time.
I don't to TV things. I don't. The thing is, I don't. I cry on my own time, please, and thank you. But I don't cry to TV series and stuff. And I cried when they rang the doorbell to tell her that her daughter was dead in the TV series. So it's a kind of a good TV series. I wouldn't recommend it to you, but to the listeners out there, A Confession, quite good.
To people who might actually be interested in true crime.
Yeah.
Willie McBurney loves true crime, loves investigating a murder.
So after Halliwell told a prison psychiatrist about a fishing spot that meant a great deal to him, the police searched the area and found 60 items of women's clothing discarded in the water. 2 of the items were linked to Halliwell's known victims, a cardigan worn by Becky at the time of her murder, and a high-heeled boot Sian was wearing when she was abducted. Did you read anything about the clothing items?
Nope.
So that was extremely interesting to me.
Gosh darn it, and I missed out.
Because I was like, oh my god, 60 items of clothing. And 2 of them, just one single cardigan that was linked to Becky because they had evidence of her wearing it, and 1 high-heeled boot that Sian was wearing at the time of her abduction. To me, it means like...
There's a lot more victims.
Yeah. And Steve Fulcher at the time thought that he would be leading an investigation into a serial killer because he didn't believe that somebody would kill someone between 2003 and 2005 and then nothing, and then kill someone else in 2011.
Bit of a gap.
Yeah, it is. So I find that incredibly disturbing.
Does not bode well.
No. There's a lot of other cases linked to those geographical locations and other geographical locations that Christopher Halliwell had been living at. And this is probably why I feel like it's fine that he did these urgent interviews. Because if he didn't turn in his notice at the police station, more progress would have been made in this case.
Yeah, I mean, morally, I don't think you can question him. He was trying to ensure the safety of Sian and trying to save her. I don't think anybody can doubt that. What he did was, in his opinion, and most people's opinion, trying to do what he could to save her.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, in most developed countries, everybody has the right to a fair trial.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, morally, I don't disagree with what he did. I wouldn't care that a murder suspect who turns out to have murdered 2 and possibly 58 more women or men or people of any fluid gender. I don't care that he was interviewed without a lawyer. I don't care that he was interviewed outside of a police station without being read his right to silence. I couldn't care less. This guy doesn't deserve any of his human rights because he's taken a life or multiple. But legally is where it all fell down. I think that the 2 judge reports that I read, they could see exactly that he'd looked to do everything he could to protect and serve, but legally he didn't dot the I's and cross the T's, and therefore anything he brought forward from those interviews had to be made inadmissible, or the judge would lose their job, the trial would get thrown out completely, so they'd lose any chance of prosecution on him.
Halliwell was convicted of the murders of Sian and Becky and is therefore not eligible for parole and is serving 2 life sentences. So that's good, at least.
I just want to reiterate, so a life sentence in the UK typically means 25 years and eligible for parole for good behaviour. So he got the 25 years for Sian's murder.
Yeah.
And when he was convicted for Becky's, the judge changed it so that it was a whole life term with no eligibility for parole. So he now will be behind bars for the rest of his life.
So Steve Fulcher believes that there are many more victims of Halliwell, as I said before, because he felt like the gap between the murders is unusual for murderers who commit murder for like that kind of satisfaction. Which makes sense. He wanted to investigate the murders of Halliwell in more detail, but then he quit the law force because of the fact that he was prosecuted because of this case and lost his whole pension because of it.
I just want to point out that it wasn't a prosecution in the legal sense.
No, it was an internal police
investigation. An internal investigation that they found he'd made a boo-boo.
The problem that I have with this whole case is the other victims, because allegedly he's probably killed a lot of more people.
The clothes would indicate so.
Yeah, I feel like that as well. Because they couldn't identify 2 of the pieces of clothing to his known victims, I would say that the other pieces of clothing was probably, maybe not all, but probably some other victims. And I feel like it's unfair that they don't investigate all of the other crimes that he could have done. Some answers would be great. You know, it would be good if they were still investigating it, but they probably aren't. Maybe they are,
It's expensive, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Ooh, what are you gonna do now?
Sleep. It's 11 o'clock.
Oh, God. Are you gonna Google berry farts?
No, I am not.
I'm probably gonna Google it and send you the details of the berry farts. Maybe I will tomorrow to not disturb you in your sleep, but you know.
Something to look forward to.
You won't look forward to it, but I'm probably still gonna send it. Yeah, alright.
You're tripping.
What are you gonna do tomorrow?
Same thing I do every Sunday. Plan to take over the world.
Alright, Pinky. Wait, who's the brain? The brain and Pinky?
Pinky and the brain, yeah.
Pinky and the brain. So
it's the brain that plots to take over the world.
I'm guessing you're the brain then.
You'd have to be Pinky.
Alright, Pinky's gonna send you all the details about the fairy farts. If I have time,
If you have time. Alright, get out of here.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to Midweek Murders. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.